Hi everyone, Gundam here for a second and brand new episode of our special edition Law of the Universal Century. Today, we're going to dive directly into the late UC in order to clear 5 particular misconceptions, which are... In this video, we are going to break apart the most common misconceptions we often have about the Shinri, which ones they are, why do we have them, and most importantly, are they really that inaccurate or are they completely far from the truth? But let's start by the beginning. What is exactly the Shinri? The Shinri, standing for Strategic Naval Research Institute, is an institution created in UC-93 by the Earth Federation forces and serving as a major mobile suit manufacturer for the last year of the early UC and most of the late UC era. Established as an independent manufacturer, but at the same time as a branch of the Federal Forces, the Shinri is an in-between between civilian and military organization. While most of the staff are in fact total civilians, the chief engineers are engineering veterans, but unlike the one employed by Anaheim Electronics, have little ties to the Zeon faction, which is the reason why none of the design popped out by Shinri have trace of the enemies in them. The Shinri was actually created for two main reasons. The first one was because the Earth Federation was attempting to centralize its developing resources. While Anaheim Electronic power grew, the Federation had to well retain its own corps of engineers and facilities, but a general lack of coordination had to well reduce their efficiency. During the Grips War, for example, the Federation had a lot of different facilities, like the Luna 2 facility, who produced the Garibaldi Beta and the Salami Sky cruisers. There was also the Augusta Labs, which designed the Gunplant and the Ashima, the Murasame Labs, which created the Psycho Gundams, or even the New Guinea base, mostly known for the Barzon. While the New Types Lab had established a sort of Unisi alliance and a sort of cooperation, most of these bases had their own agenda, which meant that they rarely cooperated with each other and inevitably caused fund losses which were a strain on the economy. While most of their creation were superior to Anaheim Electronics' regular units, they couldn't simply compete with the mega firmware productivity, which is why the Federation had to rely on Anaheim Electronics to have access to a large number of mass production machines, such as the Jagan. So by dissolving all this facility inside a single centralized institute, the Federal Forces hoped to gain a high-technology specialized think tank, which could provide the military needs under a strict agenda, which, in the end, actually worked. The second reason was that the Federation had actually grown mistrustful of Anaheim Electronics and no longer wished to be bounded with them. After all, Anaheim Electronics had supported the AUG against the Federation, sold units to Axis Zeon, nearly completely financed newborn Neo Zeon, and had respectively disrupted the UC and Zeta projects by handling the Sinanjustine and later the Xi Gundam to the Sleeve and Mafti respectively. No longer wishing to be dependent of a mega corporation which didn't exactly have the Federation best interest at Earth, the Federation forces established a new faction of their own, which would now sell technology to the enemies of the state. Despite all of that, the Shinri remained in the shadow for nearly 10 years and only rose to prominence nearly 2 decades after its creation due to the start of the Formula series and the creation of the Gundam F-90, who completely humiliated Anaheim Electronics. Based initially on Earth, Shinri later became involved with ECOAS in the mid-UC-90 and thus expanded its facilities to Luna 2. By UC-120, Shinri had also expanded to the new Frontier site in Site 4 and later create new facilities at the Moon and Site 2 as well. But that's enough setting for today, and it's time for us to explore all the 5 particular misconceptions we often have about the Shinri. A first misconception is to consider that the Shinri just pumped up like that, in no time and with no previous background. This is actually false. We talked earlier that the Shinri was created by folding all the different facilities into a single institute, but there is actually more than that. In fact, the Shinri had a direct predecessor called the S3, standing for Strategic Tactical Research Institute. The S3 was actually what remained of the original Bison plan, also known as the V Project, which had survived the 1-year war and onward. The S3 was basically a paper-timer organization. An advisory agency, the S3 had effectively no decisional power and had a very loose influence over all the different facilities. This was mainly because, unlike the SINRI, the Tactical Research Institute was not directly part of all these different institutes, and thus, as an outsider with no real executive power, was relegated to be the unknown mediator. But after the Grips War, things changed as the three most important facilities were basically in trouble. Basically, the Murasame and Augusta labs were severely diminished because not only half of their essential staff were ex-Xeons, the same Xeon which came back to claim the Earth, but also to deal with the fact that under Titan's management, they had basically and quite regularly committed crimes against humanity. Like biotechnologically modifying children or vivisecting them, or playing with their memories as if they were mere jukebox, or like just dropping them inside military prototypes in civilian areas. They had basically lost the face. And the third facility, well, after the events of Zeta Gundam, Luna 2 had now lost the trust of the Federation. After all, its garrison had evilly supported the Ayuk by giving them surplus of ships, or just by smuggling them various units of various importance. Even with the Ayuk reconciliation with the Earth Assembly, Luna 2 was not getting away with this kind of defiance. With these three institutes now politically amputated, only the S3 was remaining to claim the throne to represent the face of the Federation R&D. After the events of Shark counterattack, the assembly was moved from Dakar to Adelaide in Australia. Also by Unicorn, it was seen in a transition state. One of the first measures of the move assembly was to give executive powers to the S3 and to double its budget. The SINRI was born from this, but its story was just started. The second misconception is to consider that the SINRI never developed any mass production mobile suits. This is entirely false. Of course, this belief is quite understandable. After all, the SINRI is known for having a higher degree of standards than Hanam Electronics, and is mostly known for its amazing prototypes like the F90 and the F91. The truth is that SINRI was very much involved in a lot of different mass production plans, although their results are up to a debate, but still, they existed and they can't be ignored since one of the Formula series' main goal was the creation of a general model for the army. Since the Lotto is considered a limited production machine, we aren't going to count it here, but it's a first example showing that the SINRI could produce quality and quantity altogether. The first mass production model manufactured by the SINRI in the UC continuity is the FD3 Gustav Karl, a grand successor to the GIM lines. Deployed in late early UC and early late UC, it was the first GIM since the GIM 3 to have been developed by the Federation engineers and not by Hanheim Electronics. Since the Mega Corporation had the right on the Jagan and the Jesta, the Gustav Karl was not developed from them and was based on a different line of the GIM series, intended to be the GIM 3. Still, there are voices saying that it was not even the GIM 3 branchet which was used as a base, so the Gustav Karl could possibly be a successor of one of the mobile suits which competed and lost against the Jagan, called the Gun Defender or simply JIT, introduced in the manga Double Fake under the Gundam. One of the arguments in the favor of the Gustav Karl being tied to the JITs is that the Gun Defender line had different variants, like the X2 cannon or the X2 burstiner, so it's quite reasonable to theorize the existence of a X4 EV armor which serves as a base for the chunky Gustav Karl. SINRI produced not many Gustav Karls, aside the cannon fodder using Unicorn narrative, which were the pre-production models, so only 5 units. 3 units were stolen by terrorist organization EARM, and the CC units in Attaway Flash had 30 units as well. So by late UC standards, the Gustav Karl had a fully fledged mass production. But is the Gustav Karl the only case? No, there are other examples as well. First, we have the G-Cannon, also its creation is more delicate to consider. To make things simple, SINRI Formula series created multiple mission packs to expand the tactical sphere of the Gundam F90. One of them was the S-Pack, which transformed the F90 into archery units. This pack gave us the F90 support type, which was very impressive and successful. The Fedis saw the potential of it, and SINRI decided to streamline the design into the Cannon Gundam, which was yet another powerful machine. The Cannon Gundam had potential as a mass production machine, and SINRI made the mistake of being too ambitious with it. To make the model available to the whole army, they collaborate with Hanheim Electronics to have access to large industrial plants to expand the production even further. Hanheim Electronics then decided to implement some productivity features in the design and bastardized the Cannon Gundam with the EV gun, thus creating the G-Cannon. Also, it was a reasonable decision as it reduced cost and eased repairs. The end result was not as performing as the initial Cannon Gundam. This serialized a piece of scenery and led to yet another conflict with Hanheim. Still, despite Hanheim involvement, the G-Cannon is a mass production model designed by Shinry. Of course, there are other minor examples, like the non-mass production model which lost the competition against the Javelin prototype, or the Flint, the ground version of the Crossbone Gundam, which was initially limited produced for the Crossbone Vanguards, but later replicated in larger quantities for the Earth Federation forces. In the end, yes, Shinry was very much involved with mass production. Now we are going to discuss about new type research, aka Space Wizard Tech. The third misconception we are going to cover is the widespread belief that Shinry did not carry new types research at all. But why that? Well, when the F-91 movie came out, many people took this sentence at heart.
昔さ、ニュータイプってモビルスーツに関してはスペシャリストがいたよな。そういうのって大概個人的には不幸だったんだよな。
For many, this statement proved the scarcity of new types in that era, something which was also continued in Victory Gundam. The rarity of Neo-Zeon groups in Late UC, which were the pioneers of new type use mobile suits and the ban of psychoframe technology after Unicorn, convinced many that the Late UC was characterized by less new types, rather that the Shinry, primary manufacturer of that era, did not choose, unlike Hanheim Electronics, to continue in this direction. But is that really true? Well, not really. After all, you would expect that an institute which inherited most of the new type lab assets would be in the possession of invaluable data about new type use technologies. So despite a few pool of new type pilots to use, the Shinry was happily involved in the development of new type use assets. In F-91, we are introduced to the biocomputer, the primary asset of the F-91, first tested on the F-92 and later reused in the Crossbone Gundams. But what is the biocomputer? In short terms, it's a reverse psychomu. The original psychomu or biosensor operates by scanning the psycho waves of the new type's pilots, amplifying them and delivers set mind waves into the funnels or pits. Inside this weapon, the psycho waves are converted into electric signals, which either move the funnels or make them fire. This way, the pilot controls the funnels with its own thoughts. But in the biocomputer, it's the other way around. The information compiled by the two sensors and monitors are formatted into an electric signal. If the pilot is an old type, this signal is converted into another electric signal readable by the human brain, thus enhancing the better awareness of the pilot and cancelling any reaction time. In the case of the F-91, the suit is equipped with a biosensor through a regular psychomu, which will activate the other functionality of the biocomputer if the pilot is recognized as a new type. The electric signal will be instead converted into a psychowave signal and be inputted into the pilot's brain. This way, the pilot would basically feel what the machine is experiencing and decrease its battle potential exponentially. But the biocomputer isn't the only new type use tech developed by Shinry. According to the manual of the old Master Grade F-91 and the Manga F-90 fastest formula, the alternative to the biocomputer coupled with a biosensor was a full psychoframe cockpit, which is indubitably exclusively new type use. This proves us that at some point during its development, the F-91, or at least the prototype, was meant to be new type use. And this is not even the last example. A decade earlier, the F-90A-Z project had created the N-Mission Pack, which transformed the Gundam F-90 into the F-90 Next type. This specialization was also new type use. In normal times, the pack gave the F-90 a transferable mode similar to the Zeta Gundam Wave Rider, but should a new type pilot enter the machine and activate the pseudo-personality computer Shah-Hasnable 3, the next step would reveal that the additional part of the N-Pack had psychoframe in them, and that the rifle also had 6-pin saber funnels for the new type pilots to use. The fourth misconception is around the relationship between the Shinry and Hanheim Electronics. Many believe that the two organizations had a bitter rivalry and hated each other. Honestly, of all the misconceptions we saw in this video, this is the one which is the closest to the reality, as it's not that false, but as always, it's much more complicated. It's true that the Shinry and Hanheim Electronics are generally not in good terms. After all, the Shinry was created to crush Hanheim monopoly on the mobile suit market. Through most of the late UC, the two manufacturers behave like assholes during their interaction and backstab each other on different occasions. The Shinry first publicly humiliated Hanam Electronics in front of the Earth Federation Assembly by calling the EV gun a trash mobile suit. The EV gun was honestly just a miniaturized J-gun normal type, and largely inferior to any of the former series model, but it was still a fine mobile suit, so it was a little bit unfair. Then, the Shinry was also accused of sabotaging the flight test of the J-gun Fireball, a variant of the J-gun air type which could supposedly compete with miniaturized mobile suits, with rectangular large size, which led to the destruction of the prototype. Hanheim, on the other hand, was not much better, if not worse. Through illegal industrial spying, they stole the data on the Vasper, the F-90 Vasper type, and the F-91, and used them to start the Silhouette Formula project, which produced the Silhouette Gundam, G-Cannon Magna, Hardigan, the Neo Gundams, and the Handheld Vasper, the GBRD, standing for Generative Beam Rifle Device. In this climate of mistrust, the Shinry systematically refused to share information to Hanheim, as shown by the very creation of the Gundam F-89, which was supposed to be a scapegoat in case the spare part obtained from Hanheim was sabotaged. However, both firms were not as much antagonists to each other as one could expect. After all, they were complementary because of their different sizes. Hanheim was an industrial titan, capable of developing in quantity and quality alike, but because of that size and decentralization, had to favor its quantity production in order to keep the budget afloat. The Shinry, on the other end, was much smaller and could afford to spend the time and efforts into refining high-performance prototypes without compromising the organization. As the two manufacturers of the Earth Federation forces, the Shinry and Hanheim had often to work together for their mutual sake. Hanheim needed the Shinry breakthroughs in order to make sure they would have access to profits in an era of dire economic crisis, while the Shinry needed Hanheim to manufacture a lot of small but essential technology used in their research. Cooperation was quite common as said earlier with the G-Cannon development, and even initially hostile situations like the pit fight between the Gundam F-90 and the Atmos concluded with cooperation. For example, the multiple construction armor of the Gundam F-91 was actually developed from the vaporizing Gatling armor of the Atmos that the Shinry had brought back to Hanheim. Both organizations indeed loathed each other's, but they actually needed each other to survive, and despite a lot of hostile policies between them, they had to work together to make sure the agenda would be profitable. The fifth and last misconception we are going to discuss about is about the apparent disappearance of the Shinry and its downfall into an enemy of the Earth Federation. In Victory Gundam, we are introduced to the Zanskar Empire, an autocratic empire based on Side 2 and enforcing its will thanks to two particular actors. The first one are the Yellow Jackets, which are special force units initially formed by the former federal garrison of Side 2 American natives, and the other one is Bespa, standing for Ballistic Equipment on Space Patrol Armory. Bespa is presented as a weapon manufacturer, established after the nationalization of the Shinry slabs of Side 2 during Zanskar early days. Despite many unique designs such as the insectoid's look, Bespa Tech clearly followed the legacy set up by Shinry and the high standards it implies. Most notably, many of these mobile suits, like the Zoroark, make use of modular combination hardpoints, which gives them the possibility to be equipped with different equipments such as artillery parts. This is a feature that the Shinry had pioneered with the Gundam F-90, but was not that used by Hanheim Electronics, who prefer selling different specialized units for a higher profit. Another example would be the variable beam launcher of the Recontour, which is clearly a descendant of the Shinry Vasper and has a similar role as a high-output beam weapon. In Crossbone Gundam Steel 7, Otis Harkins, as Shinry senior engineer, explained that the organization was facing bankruptcy due to their involvement with the Crossbone Vanguard and that they hoped to capitalize on the selling of the Gundam F-99 record breakers to escape this dire situation. With the three prototypes being destroyed by the Jupiter Empire, and with Zanskar taking over the Side 2 branches of the Shinry, people naturally concluded that the Shinry fell in disgrace, bankrupted, and what remaining was warped into producing weapons against its former employer, the Earth Federation. This mighty conclusion seems logical, but is actually completely false. Why? Well, because the Shinry was still present at the time of Victory Gundam. The first proof of it was given to us by the manual of the non-great James Gunn kit. In UC-147, so shortly after the uprisings in Side 2, the Earth Federation sought to replace the outdated James Gun and Javelin. While the Javelin successor, the JAVUS, was commissioned to Arnhem Electronics, the successor to the James Gun was instead commissioned to the Sinri. So we have the Earth Federation still commissioning Mobile 2 to the Sinri after the creation of BESPA. Conclusion: only the Side 2 branches transformed itself into BESPA, and the other installation remained unchanged. The second proof is given in the series itself. The Ligue Militaire is backed by Arnhem Electronics, but before you say it, no, it's not backed by the Sinri. Why? Well, because the Ligue Militaire is the Sinri, or at least the branches still present on Earth. The members on the technology used by the Ligue Militaire support this claim. First, 3 core members of the Ligue Militaire were involved with the Sinri. Otis Harkins, one of the old men of the Camion Corps, was the primary engineer of the Gundam F-99, and worked for Sinri for quite a long time. Owen Youngs, one of the leaders of the organization and decapitated early in the series, is a wealthy aristocrat and one of the primary civilian investors of the Sinri. And then we have Murray Miguel, mother of Yuzue Win, which also worked at Sinri on the F-99. The technologies developed by the Ligue Militaire are the other proof that the organization is, very much like BESPA, another extension of the Sinri. The Victory plan, with the Victory and the Victory 2 Gundams, is the key to this. The Victory is miniaturized and makes use of hardpoints. Of course, this is not enough to show the affiliation, but the Victory has other assets. The Minovsky flight system, allowing the Victory to fly on Earth, was first created by Arnhem Electronics for large Mobile 2 like the Xi Gundam, but the miniaturized version was introduced by the Sinri with the F-90 assault type. Not yet convinced? The core fighter of the Victory Gundam is designed after the core fighter of the F-90 3rd Cluster Kai, an improved variant of the F-90 3rd Cluster Gundam, one of the final results of the Sinri Formula series. The ability of the Victory Gundam to dock with boots and top parts is also inherited from the Cluster Kai. On the other end, the Minovsky drive system of the Victory 2 is an improved version of the same technology used by Sinri Gundam F-99 and was first introduced with the F-90 Warbird type. So yes, Sinri still existed by UC-150 outside of BESPA. In the light of this, the geopolitical context of the events of Victory Gundam can be cleared even more. The Zanskan War would be the expression of a sort of civil war between the terrestrial and space branches of the Sinri, caused by the changes in the politics in the Earthsphere, lack of funds, and the economic problems introduced in Crossband Gundam. And we have now completed our breakdown episode about the 5 most common misconceptions about the Sinri. This will be all for today's video, but stay tuned for future lore content delivered on the same channel. Hit the like button and most importantly, comment and subscribe as it will really help the channels to flourish. So long fellow new types until the time of our next special edition.